Now we have the player BP in the world. But before we do anything else, our player needs a ground to stand on. Otherwise, the player is just going to fall down forever. Let's go to the Asset folder. And you can see there is a TileMap file. Right-click on it and select Sprite Actions. Then select Create Tile Set. Now we have a new tile set file in the folder. You can think of it as a set of tiles that we can use to paint the level. Let's open it, and I'm going to dock the window first. The default size for each tile is 32 by 32. You can click to see the tiles are too big. Let's decrease the tile size to 16 by 16. This is the actual size for each tile. Alright, now the grid fits our tiles. We need to add a collision shape to each tile. This is to define how a tile interacts with other objects. To do it, select a tile first, and click on this Add Box button up here. Right away, you can see a box-sized collision is added to this tile on the right side. So I'm going to add a box collision to every tile you see here, except for the grass in the pink color in the bottom, because the grass tiles are decorative, so they don't need the collision shape anyways. You can also enable the Show Colliding Tiles option up here, so you can see the collision shapes in blue color in the tile set. I really wanted to find out a way to create the collision shapes for all the tiles just by one click. But unfortunately, I couldn't. So I'm just going to do this one by one. And fortunately, we don't really have too many tiles here. Another downside with the Paper 2D plugin is that we do not have the auto tile feature here, which means when we use the tiles to paint the level short after, we're going to have to select the tile that we want manually before we paint. Also, the Unreal Engine is focused on 3D games. So when we are creating a 2D game in the engine, we are actually still doing everything in a 3D environment. So essentially, it's going to be a 2D game running in a 3D world. Alright, back to the tiles. These grass tiles do not need collision shapes. So we are finished here, and we can close this window. Now the tile set file is ready. Let's right-click on it and select Create Tile Map. You can think of the tile map as a canvas, where we paint the tiles on it to create our level. Let's open it to create a very simple level for the testing purpose. By default, this is a very small tile map, where we can also have like 4x4 tiles. Let's make it bigger. I'm going to set the width to 100 and the height to 40 tiles. Alright, let's also enable the Show Tile Grid option. Now we can zoom in to paint the tiles. Basically, this is just going to be like a flat level. I'm just going to make a very simple level for the player to stand on and move around. One thing I found out previously is that we want to leave some space beneath the ground tiles, because if the player falls down the platform, the camera is going to move downward with the player. So we want to have some tiles beneath the ground. Otherwise, we are going to see some empty space. Alright, I'm going to select these 3 tiles. I'm going to leave a space of 7 blocks downward. Then I'm just going to use these tiles to draw a horizontal line. These 3 are essentially all the same tile with a slightly different look, so they can connect to one another seamlessly. And this can help you create some randomness to break the repetitive pattern. We want to make sure this line connects both edges. This is going to close the space downward, so we can use the fill tool to fill up the space with other tiles. Maybe the ground is too flat, so let's add some small bumps here to help us test the player's movement later on. Now let's repaint some of the tiles below the bumps. And we have some tiles for the edges and the corners. We can use them to connect other tiles. I'm just making a very simple level layout here. Maybe you can do something else you want. Maybe you can create a gap for the player to jump over, or maybe you can create a higher platform to test how high the player can jump. Overall, I think we do not need to spend too much time making this layout too complicated. Since we are just starting our journey, we should focus on the player's movement. By the end of this course, after we have finished most of the gameplay features, I'm going to come back to show you how to design game levels. Alright, we are done with the tile map. Now let's drag the tile map into the world. While we are doing this, you might want to double check if you're in the unlit mode in the viewport. Let's reset the location of the tile map. I like to keep the player at the origin point of the world. So let's move the tile map up until the player's feet touch the ground tiles. Now we can see the grid on the tile map. Sometimes it's helpful, but in this case, it makes it harder for us to see what's going on here. So we're gonna hide the grid right after. Let's move closer to focus on the player. The player is standing on the edge, so let's move the tile map to the left a little bit. Alright, let me show you the final location of my tile map. Now we want to test if the player can interact with the tile map. Remember that the player is a paper 2D character. As a character blueprint class, it should be able to fall down until it hit a collision shape. So I'm going to bring the player up. Then we can simulate the physics of the player to see if it's working. Usually, you would want to run the game to test. But here we don't have a controllable character, and we just want to check if the physics of the player is working. That's why we are using this simulate option. When we simulate the game, it's like we are not playing it. We are still like outside of the game, and we can observe the physics in the world. The key difference is that we're not controlling the character we are supposed to play. We are more like an observer, looking at everything that's happening in the game world. Looks good. The player falls down and stands on the platform, and we can press the ESC key to stop the simulation. Next, I want to talk about how the 3D world impacts our 2D gameplay. But first, let's select the tile map, go to the detail panel, and search for grid, and disable show per tile grid when selected. Alright, now when we move closer, we can see the tile map is just a very thin layer. It doesn't really have thickness. So how can our player stand on it? Well, to answer this question, we need to show the collision. You can enable the show collision option here. The shortcut is Alt plus the C key. Now we can see the collision of the tiles, and the collision is wider than the capsule of the player, so they can interact, as long as they are aligned along the y-axis. Let me move the player along the y-axis just a little bit. Then we simulate to see what's going to happen. At this distance, the player can still interact with the tile map. That's because the collision shape of the tile map is still wide enough to capture the player. But if the player is too far away along the y-axis, it's going to miss the platform and fall down forever. Alright, let's move the player back. And we go to the tile map to check how we can modify the thickness of the collision. Scroll down in the detail panel. We can find collision thickness here. 50 is a good value for this course, so I'm not going to change it. Next, I want to show you what is going to happen when the player is too far away from the platform. I'm going to move the player really far away and simulate the game. Then you should see the player fall straight down. This shows you that we are still working in a 3D world, even though the visuals and the gameplay are completely 2D. The takeaway is that we should always keep the player and the tile map at the same place along the y-axis. Later on, I'm going to show you how to restrain the player's movement so it cannot move along the y-axis. But for now, everything is okay. Let's just wrap up this lecture.